All right, welcome everybody. That's my only claim to fame right there, a few minutes in a Star Wars clip. So nice to see you guys. Glad you're here with us, and want to welcome each of our central locations. Big shout out to Central Summerlin and Sunrise Mountain, Southern Highlands, to our Central Kingman family, those watching online and those who are joining us in different prison facilities in our partnership with God Behind Bars. Thank you guys for being with us today. Well, how many of you love Star Wars? Star Wars people in the house. Yes, lots of people love Star Wars. You know, I grew up on Star Wars. I saw some of the original Star Wars movies in the theater. How many of you saw some of the original movies in the theater? You just dated yourself. We're dinosaurs, people. We're relics. And love them. And when the new Star Wars came out, The Force Awakens came out, absolutely, I loved The Force Awakens. Rogue One, loved Rogue One. And then this last Star Wars movie came out, The Last Jedi. Now, some people love The Last Jedi. How many of you love The Last Jedi? Like, it was awesome, you really loved it? Yes, if, 6 people loved The Last Jedi. I gotta tell you, man, as a lifetime Star Wars fan, the way Luke Skywalker died or whatever the heck he did at the end of this movie, transitioned. It was sort of like destroying my childhood dreams of the way Luke Skywalker would die. And so some people were excited because there's all these new characters and new storylines, and some of us were grieving a lost childhood at the end of that movie. But I'm holding out hope for the next one. Here's the deal with all the Star Wars movies. The Star Wars movies are sort of about this ragtag group of people, the Rebel Alliance, the Resistance, who are up against the Empire, right? You know, the evil galactic empire, or in the more recent movies, the First Order. Now, the Empire has all the power. The Empire has the Death Star, right? The Empire can destroy whole planets. The Empire has got it going on. They got all the evil characters. They got all the momentum behind them. And then here's this ragtag group of people. Princess Leia, Han Solo, Luke Skywalker, or more recently, Finn and Rey and Admiral Akbar. You know, all these people that are supposed to rise up and provide resistance against the Empire. And I think that's part of why we love the Star Wars movies. It's the underdog story, right? It's the sort of down and out underdog story. We can do it against incredible odds. When you think about what it means to be a follower of Jesus today, there are some parallels, because in a lot of ways, we live in a world that is broken and falling. The Bible talks about the word world in several different ways. I mean, John 3:16, famous passage, says, God so loved the what? World, right? God loved the world. And yet there are other times when the Bible uses the word world, when it's actually speaking about a world system that is apart from God and either against God consciously or unconsciously, not directly, but just is in the way it exists. And so the Bible says, do not love the world. You know, one place, or the things of the world, right? Romans says, do not conform to the world. So we are in a system. Satan is called the god of this age, or the god of this world. He's given a period of time where he has authority and power. And the book of Revelation tells and foretells a time when that day will end, but it hasn't yet. And so the struggle between good and evil is real. The struggle between the system, if you will, and ourselves can feel real. When you become a follower of Jesus and start living out your faith, don't be surprised if you don't find some pushback from people, from systems, from things in your life. Because when you become a follower of Jesus, you become a rebel. Now, before you become a follower of Jesus, a lot of us were rebels in other ways, right? Running from God, doing our own thing, you know, singing along with AC/DC, I'm on the highway to hell, don't stop me. We're doing our thing. But the day eventually comes, thank God, in many of our lives when, God does what he does. He takes rebels, breaks rebels, and then rebuilds rebels and releases rebels with a cause. And now the cause that we carry isn't rebelling against God, but we rebel against injustice, we rebel against evil, we rebel against the world system that is against God, and we surrender our lives to God in doing it. So I want to talk to you today about how we can all join the resistance, about how we can all be rebels with a cause for good and for God, and about how all of us in our lives can engage in certain behaviors that push back against the injustice of the system, the world system that is anti-God in our culture. And so I'm excited to do that with you. I want to do it with you by looking at Matthew chapter 5, verse 33. And in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus is doing some teaching, and he keeps using this phrase several times. He says, "You've heard that it was said, but I tell you." You know, you've heard that it was said, and when he would say this, he's sort of throwing he's throwing the discussion back to deep-rooted cultural things at the time. He's like, these are the things that you have heard. These are the things our culture tells you are right on, or the religious culture tells you are right on. But then he's saying, I tell you in my own authority, and he's pushing back on the status quo. And he's taking it further and adjusting it. And he does a couple things. In Matthew chapter 5, let's look at verse 33, where he challenges us to push back when it comes to both truth and mercy in our lives. So check this out. Matthew chapter 5, verse 33. Help me out in the red words. He says, "You've also heard that our ancestors were told, you must not break your vows. And you must carry out your vows you make to the Lord. But I say, do not make any vows." Then he goes on in verse 37. He says, just say a simple what? Yes, I will. Or no, I won't. Anything beyond this is from the evil one. So Jesus sets this up. Now, he says, you've heard that it was said, and he starts talking about vows. Vows were how people would enter into relationships, business relationships, contractual relationships. They would take vows, and they would often, and they had a whole system of taking vows. Jesus actually, in the rest of the verses between those two that we just read, he kind of outlines some of this. He says, don't say, I swear by heaven, or I swear by the temple, or I swear by the altar, because people had taken this idea of keeping your word, giving a vow, and they had created a hierarchy that you could swear by. So, if you swear by one thing, it may not be as binding as if you swear by something else. You could swear by the altar, but that's not swearing by God. You could swear by the temple, but it's kind of like crossing your fingers behind your back when you're a kid. And you say something, it's not true, but your fingers were crossed. And so it becomes this whole corrupt system where truth and lie completely blurs, where people don't keep their word, they don't keep their promises. They say, well, I swore by this, but I didn't swear by that. And Jesus just comes along and he goes, look. He just sort of blows that whole thing up. He's like, you've heard that it was said, but I tell you, let your yes be yes, as some translations say, and your no be no. In other words, be a person that's about truth, that keeps your word. Stop playing all these games and playing loose with the truth. It's a great reminder for all of us. Rebels with a cause speak truth. They speak truth. So be a rebel with truth. Be a rebel with truth in your life. Now, we live in a culture, I don't know if you feel this, but I feel it acutely. It's harder and harder to distinguish truth from lies, right? Media and journalists people view the journalistic profession with more skepticism than we ever have. When we hear a news story, we don't know if we should believe it or not believe it, right? How many political leaders, pastors, business leaders say one thing again and again and again and again, and then it comes out, it's a lie. It's Lance Armstrong's all over the newspaper this week, right? For years, I denied doping. We all believed him until he didn't. And all that stuff, starts to affect you in your life, because you just start to wonder, is any of you have this mind? Is anybody telling the truth? Right? Does anybody keep their word? Is there anybody left? Listen, I've had friends who are pastors, people that I've loved, that have lived lies right kind of in front of me for years and years. And then it all comes out. And when it all comes out, even though all the evidence is there, some of them continued to lie. And I remember saying to my wife, Lori, more than once, conversations I'm sure you've had around your own dinner table, like, how can these people, how can my friends, look, none of us are perfect, but how can you live a lie that deep, that long, year in and year out with such conviction? How can you live in that kind of a lie? And I'll tell you how. Practice. New research, I was just reading it this week, reveals that when we stretch the truth and when we angle on the truth in the small things, it actually prepares our brain to accept bigger and bigger lies. Practice is how you get to a place where your whole life is a lie and you're living it out. God, protect us, right? God, keep us from being people that live in lies. Now, there are some lies that seem harmless enough. I found this website of lies that kids were told by their parents when they were little to do certain things, and some of these were great. I had to share them with you, lighten it up here. My mom told me the wheels of a car couldn't move until every seatbelt had been buckled. I believed this for 24 years. Classic. All right, here's another one. My dad told me that special dark Hershey's were for dads only, and on Halloween he would make me go through my candy to give him all of them. Look, I might even tell that one for Whoppers, not for special dark, but Whoppers, that's the next level. All right, one more. My parents used to tell us that every time we lied, a star appeared on our forehead, and they'd know we were fibbing. So when we lied, we covered our foreheads, and that's how they really knew that we were lying. Brilliant. Come on, parents, that's next level right there. Brilliant. Oh, wow. I'm not that smart. Now, some lies are small, little lies, little fibs that we tell that, we don't even really matter. Sometimes we don't even realize that we're doing it. I read one study where they concluded that 60% of adults in a 10-minute conversation lie, not once, but 3 times. Small little things, little exaggerations, little stretches of the truth, and then one study came along and they said that I think it was 1 out of 4, every person that you talk to would lie about seeing certain movies to impress other people. I was like, what? And then they found that the number 1 movie people lied about seeing was The Godfather. Out of every 10, this is what this study said, out of every 10 people that said they saw The Godfather, 3 of them are lying. I'll make you an offer you can't refuse. Now, what's Jesus talking about here when he says, look, let your yes be yes, let your no be no? Is he talking about the way we exaggerate or stretch the truth? Well, I think certainly we need to be careful about how we exaggerate and stretch the truth. The truth is, all of us lie at some level or another, at some degree or another. I mean, Lori has come up to me, my wife, after certain services where I'll tell a story, not really a planned story, I'll just tell a story, and she'll say, you know what, Chad? Trust me, she will do this. I remember that. And that didn't happen exactly the way you remember it. You're making yourself look really good in the way that you remember that story. This is the truth. And if she was here, she would tell you, I always come back the next service and tell it like she told me to tell it, because I'm a smart man. But sometimes we're not even conscious of this, that we're doing it, right? The fish was this big, then it was this big, then it was this big. The golf game was this, then it was that, then it was this, right? So we all kind of, I think, wrestle with being completely truthful. But Jesus is saying we need to be people that struggle and wrestle with being honest throughout our lives, with being people that keep our word and keep our promises, people that others can count on. Our yes will be yes, our no will be no. Telling the truth, being people of integrity. Now, this doesn't mean you abuse the truth. It doesn't mean you're ornery. It doesn't mean you sit down with grandma's Christmas dinner and you're eating chicken and she says, how's the chicken? And you say, man, I'm throwing up in my mouth right now. That's how the chicken is. Like, you can't go down that road, right? Or I wouldn't. Say, well, I'm just being honest, right? Your significant other walks in, they've got new jeans on. How do you like my jeans? And if you don't like them, you better keep your mouth shut. Doesn't mean you go into a business negotiation and put all your cards on the table. That'd be crazy, right? Like, you wouldn't be the business negotiator much longer. But I do think it means you're careful not to lie. You're careful about what you say. You're careful to keep your promises. And you're taking a longer view towards integrity than the short view in your life. I mean, think about it as parents when we tell our kids, yeah, we'll play tonight when I get home from work. Look, if you're going to say it, do it. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up. In fact, I try to operate on a simple principle in my life, and that is under-promise and over-deliver. Under-promise and over-deliver. Because, look, if you under-promise, then the expectation isn't there. And if you're able to over-deliver, that's awesome, right? But a lot of times we over-promise with our kids, our family, people we love, then we under-deliver, and then trust gets broken. Our kids' hearts get broken. People feel like they've been lied to or betrayed. And we're left with, a situation now we've got to clean up. Remember this, relationships can only move at the speed of trust. Relationships can only move at the speed of trust. And the way we keep our word will set the bar on where that trust is. If trust is high, relationships can go, right? Because you trust that person with your whole life. You think about it. When you have real trust with somebody, your heart's open to them, your life's open to them, you're excited, you're moving forward. When you trust even a boss at work, you trust them, that changes how you work, right? When you don't trust them, you got to fight through that. Relationships move at the speed of trust. So for me, I try to underpromise and overdeliver because I want to maintain that trust with my family. I try to be careful even about little things. People will say, hey, can you call me? Can you call me tomorrow? No, I can't call you tomorrow. And I've just gotten to where I'm more comfortable telling people the truth, saying, look, I can make sure somebody calls you tomorrow, but I'm not going to be able to call you tomorrow. Or if I tell you I'm going to call you tomorrow, then I want to do my best and know that I can follow through with that commitment. So keeping your word, letting your yes be yes. I remember my father years ago, he sold an old motorhome that we had sitting next to our house. He just parked it right there, old motorhome. He sold it to our neighbor on the backside. He'd known him for a long time. And most of these things go down with legal paperwork and legal documents, and that's all good, and I'm not suggesting otherwise. But it was interesting. My dad sold it to my neighbor. The guy was just going to pay it off over like 5 or 7 years on a handshake. Shook the guy's hand. And I remember telling him, like, what are you doing? You're just going to trust Larry? His name was Larry. You're going to trust Larry? And I remember my dad said, I've known him a lot of years. Trust, and he'll do what's right. Sure enough, I think it took him 6. Larry paid off that entire thing. No contract. Now, I'm not suggesting that's how we live our lives in this world today, but I am suggesting as followers of Jesus, our own standards of ourselves should be, I don't need a contract to keep my word, right? Because my yes is yes and my no is no. Live as people of truth. That's a powerful way to rebel in a culture that plays so loose with the truth. Live as people of truth and integrity. Tanner Muncie, one of my favorite characters from an old Sports Illustrated article, when he was 7 years old, he's playing Little League baseball. And he's out playing first base, and he gets the ball, and this runner comes around first base. He's going for second base, and little Tanner reaches out to tag him. And the umpire's standing over there, and he says, he's out. He got him. He calls it, the whole deal. And Tanner walks over to the umpire and says, I didn't get him. Leave it to a 7-year-old, right? I didn't get it. Can you imagine, like, LeBron doing that in a basketball game, like, oh, man, never happened. He says, I didn't get him. So the umpire's like, okay, so he reverses the call. Well, what got this kid on the cover of Sports Illustrated years ago was a couple weeks later, he's playing a game. The same umpire is at this game officiating, and little Tanner, 7 years old, is shortstop. And he gets the ball, and this kid's running from second base to third base, and he reaches out to touch the kid, and the umpire basically calls the kid safe. He made it. And little Tanner, he can tell, is upset. He's really bothered by this. His face color changes, and he's standing there. So the umpire comes over to him and says, son, are you okay? And he says, sir, I got him. I got him. And so the umpire calls the kid out. And even in Little League baseball, the coach comes running out of the dugout. It's game on, right? Parents are up in arms and the whole deal. And this is what that umpire was quoted as saying in Little League baseball. He said, look, this young man has proven himself to me as somebody who tells the truth. And he did it at great cost to himself 2 weeks ago. And I believe him today. It's my call to make. I'm reversing the call. He's out. Now, I tell you that story because sometimes we think in the short view, it's just better to lie, right? And sometimes in the short view, it may be more expedient to lie. But in the long view, truth wins. In the long view, truth wins. In the long view, it always comes out anyway. So in the long view, we got to take the long view. Let our yes be yes, our no be no. And so for me in my life, I'm trying to, even in the details, be wise, right? Even in the small things, be careful. Because how does somebody go from here to here? Practice. So I want to practice telling the truth with the little things. Jesus says you're faithful with the little. You can be faithful with much. Here's another way that we can rebel against the system, and that is be a rebel with mercy. Be a rebel with mercy in your heart and in your life. I saw this Star Wars poster, thought it was pretty classic, so I brought it in to share with you. It's a little picture of Darth Vader here. It says, strong people don't put others down, they lift them up. Darth Vader, philanthropist. That's kind of the rule of the empire, right? You mess up, you pay for it. You hit me, I hit you back, I hit you harder. You hurt me, I hurt you, and I hurt you harder. And it becomes a culture of payback. And Jesus is going to push back against this idea of payback in his culture and ours as well. Matthew chapter 5, verse 38, help me on the red word. He says, you've heard the law that says the punishment must match the injury. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say, do not what? Resist an evil person. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, offer the other cheek also. Now, there's a lot here. First of all, Jesus is talking about this principle, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. That principle was actually put in place in the ancient world because people were taking retribution to the extreme. That principle was actually trying to limit retribution, not give a justification for it. In other words, people, it was kind of like, hey, you insult me, I burn your house down, I win. You come at me, I destroy you, I win. And in the ancient world, it would lead to tribal warfare. Just one thing would escalate to the next, and these people would be going after each other. And so originally, this whole idea of the Israelites of eye for an eye and truth for a truth, particularly with a mediating third party who administers the justice, the idea was to stop this cycle of retribution that kept building among families and individuals and tribes, one after the other until it was just full-scale craziness, right? So this law that was meant to limit retribution through a third party that would bring things into a just kind of weighing was now being used in Jesus' day as an excuse to extract revenge and to get back at people who'd hurt you. So Jesus comes along and he says, look, I tell you, don't resist an evil person. Now, this is a passage that's been really misinterpreted and misunderstood for a lot of generations of believers. Jesus talks about somebody getting slapped on the right cheek. Did you notice that? Somebody hits you on the right cheek. He says, turn to the left. And people have wondered, what does that mean? What's supposed to mean? Does it mean like if you get in a fight or a robber comes out of a store and sees you there and you're in the way and he hits you in the right cheek, you're supposed to go, great, hit me again. Like Rocky, like, hit me again, to Mr. T. Remember that, Again. Well, in that culture, first of all, in the culture of what Jesus is talking about, this isn't a fist fight. To hit somebody on the right cheek was to insult them. It wasn't to hurt them, it was to humiliate them. That was the whole point, right? So if somebody came along and slapped somebody across the right cheek, it was a huge Middle Eastern, full tilt, full scale insult. When a person got insulted at that level, what do? Jesus says, here's what you do. Turn to him your other cheek. And now all of a sudden the humiliation starts to go back the other way. It's like, okay, if this is who you're going to be, if you're going to show yourself for who you are, then here you go. Here's my other cheek. This was not about self-defense. This is not about being caught in a fight where a guy's beating you up. Can you put your hands up and defend yourself? This isn't about military intervention or lack of intervention or international war. This is about payback in the context of being humiliated by somebody else through a slap on the cheek. And Jesus is saying in that context, he's basically, in that story, he tells a story about going the extra mile under Roman law where they had to go 1 mile. If a Roman soldier came up to you and said, carry my bag, you legally had to carry his bag, and the Jews resented it and hated it. He says, don't only carry it 1 mile, carry it 2 miles. Now, can you imagine the second mile where the Roman guy's like, what are you doing? Put it down, stop. You're my, So what are you doing in both of these moments? When you turn the other cheek, when you carry the bag the other mile, here's what you're doing. You're standing firm. In some ways, you're humiliating the person who's humiliated you, but you're not striking back. In other words, this is about payback. And Jesus is saying when it comes to payback, show mercy, not vengeance. Show mercy, not vengeance. You want to be a rebel in today's culture? Be a person of mercy in your heart and life. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 15. See that no one pays back evil for evil, but always try to do what? Good to each other and to all people. Try to do good to each other. So maybe that means that you make a commitment in your life that even though your ex is maybe acting in a very disrespectful way towards you or to your family, you make a commitment to not speak harshly about them in front of your kids. Maybe it means that, the person that you're dating or you're married to or doing things that you find very hurtful and painful, and you can still stand your ground, but you try very hard to show them good and not evil. You're not escalating the situation. You're not making it worse. Now, Jesus, when he talks about turning the other cheek, a lot of abusers, domestic abusers over the years love to, hey, you should just turn the other cheek. That is not what Jesus is talking about here. He's not giving people a license to physically abuse and batter other people at all. This is more about standing your ground, but doing it with love and mercy. And certainly if you're in a situation like that, you need to get protection and get somewhere safe in your heart and in your life so that God can continue to work in your life. And you can still show mercy, but you can still have boundaries and not be a doormat for somebody else. How do you be a rebel? How you be a rebel with a cause? Speak truth, right? Show mercy, and let God use that in your life. I saw this news story from France a couple weeks ago. I imagine you saw it. In France, this individual went in and held up a supermarket, and as he did, two people were shot. He ended up taking hostages. The police all showed up, and eventually he let the hostages go. They persuaded him to do that, all but a terrified woman. And that's when Lieutenant Colonel Arnaud Beltrame did something pretty remarkable. He offered to trade places with the woman who was the hostage. Now, he wasn't expected to do this, and he wasn't required to do this with his role in the police. But he volunteered to do it, and he stepped up, and he did it. And he stepped in, he left his gun, he went in. Eventually, the woman came out. And he knew he might be putting his life on the line in that kind of a situation. And eventually what happened is gunshots rang out. The police stormed that area. They took out the threat, and they found Lieutenant Colonel Beltrame was injured, and he ended up dying at the hospital. And they proclaimed him a hero. The French president said he represented the French spirit of resistance. But that's only half the story. Because Lieutenant Beltrame became a follower of Jesus in his 20s. He grew up in a non-religious home, but he committed his life to Christ and to Christian values in his life. And it was Peter Hitchens who wrote about this colonel. He said this, I believe very deeply that Christian societies are different from non-Christian ones, precisely because all of us know that such selfless courage is the ideal of what we should all be. And I think that Lieutenant Colonel Beltrame did what he did because of the specifically Christian saying, greater love has no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. Jesus didn't just tell us to be rebels in the sense of pushing back against the injustice of the system. He was a rebel. He spoke truth to the point that they put him on a cross and crucified him. And not only that, at his crucifixion, he prayed that God would forgive us and show us mercy and compassion. He modeled the way. And so, as rebels with a cause, we want to speak truth. We want to show mercy. And in doing so, we'll stand out like a light in the darkness. We'll stand out like a beacon in a very confusing world. We'll stand out like a lighthouse on the storms of life, directing people towards a greater hope, and that is the hope of God for all of us. So this week, when you're tempted to play loose with the truth, even the little things, remember this conversation. Remember that the way people go from small lies to big lies is simply practice. So hold to the truth. Be honest with yourself, with God, and with others. When it comes to showing retribution or payback, remember all that God has done in your life. Remember all that he's forgiven you for, and be a rebel by showing mercy, by forgiving, by letting God work in the midst of that situation through your witness and testimony in a powerful way. Maybe you're here and you've never become a follower of Jesus. And if that's where you are, I'd love to give you an opportunity just to reach out to him and experience his grace and love and forgiveness in your heart and in your life today. Would all of you please bow your heads and close your eyes? If you'd like to become a Christian, you can begin that spiritual journey by repeating this prayer after me. Just say, "Dear God, I thank you for loving me. Thank you for sending Jesus into the world. I believe he died on the cross for my sins. I believe he rose again. Forgive me for my sins. Give me the gift of eternal life. Help me face the challenges I'm up against. God, I surrender my life to you. In Christ's name." Friends, with every head bowed and every eye closed, if that's your prayer today, if it's your commitment, I'm going to ask you to just slip your hand in the air. Just to say before God, you're going to follow him in your life. You're reaching out to him today. You're tired of trying to do it on your own. Just slip your hand in the air. God, we thank you for your love for us, and I thank you for each individual reaching out to you today. I pray you fill their life with purpose and meaning and love. And God, with all of us, would you remind us of what it means to rebel against the right things and to surrender to you in other things and allow you control in our lives. Thank you for each one of these individuals. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.